So we economists like to talk about markets a lot, supply and demand, where people are selling things and demanders would like to buy things. And markets generally work pretty well. People make things or they supply a service and then the demanders buy it. And there is an appropriate amount. The correct amount is being produced, and everything that is being produced is being bought, and everything works out very well. But sometimes this is not the case. And when the market doesn't work, we want to understand why. So when the market's not working very well, we call this a market failure. Either too much of something is being produced or not enough, or there's something that people would like to buy or a service people would like and it's just not being supplied at all. And sometimes there are systematic reasons why there's too much or not enough or nothing being produced at all. What I want to talk about today is the difference between private goods, which work well in markets, and public goods that are something that can usually only be provided by the government. And we're going to talk about why that is. Private goods versus public goods. First, let's talk about private goods. These are a little easier to understand. A private good, it could be a service as well, are things like painting services. So here's a guy that you might want to hire to paint your house. Here's a pizza. That's an example of a private good. A carrot is something that is a private good. Other examples would be things like electricity or cars or houses. These are all things that are private goods. And things that are private goods, things that markets work very well for people to exchange, to buy and sell, have two characteristics generally. And these two characteristics, we say that private goods are both rivalrous and excludable. So let me write private goods here are rivalrous and excludable. Now, rivalrous means that if more people want to try to get the benefits from a service, or if more people want to enjoy a good, then you need more of it. Or everybody's going to get less if you don't have more of it, if you don't spend more for the good. So if everybody in town tries to use the same painter, we're not all going to get our houses painted at the same time. We're either going to have to wait longer or we're only going to be able to get part of our house painted. If everybody tries to eat the same pizza, we're all going to get less pizza. So we have to spend more, or if we don't spend more to make more pizza, we're all going to get less pizza, or we're going to get less quality pizza. Same thing with carrots, or electricity, or houses. If we all try to share the same amount of electricity, we all have to get less. So that's the idea of rivalrous. The opposite, if there was something that we didn't need more of, we'd call it non-rivalrous. Now, another key feature of a private good is that private goods are excludable. Excludable is the idea that if you don't pay, we can keep you from getting it. Now, this is a key feature that if you're going to have a business and you want to make money in a private market, then you need to be able to keep people from getting something if they don't pay. So that's the idea of excludable. Something is non-excludable if we can't force people to pay and they still get the benefits. So these are all examples of private goods, and the market works pretty well for private goods. Now let's talk about public goods. This is where the market failure idea comes in. Generally with a public goods are not going to be provided unless the government provides them. Now why is that? Well, they're the opposite of private goods. Public goods have these two characteristics. They're non-rivalrous, which means that we don't need more of them just because there are more people. We don't need to spend more just because there are more people. And they're non-excludable, which means we can't make people pay. They're going to get the benefits whether they pay or not. We cannot exclude anyone. The best example of something that is a public good is national defense. Suppose you wanted to start a business to provide national defense for a small country that didn't have it. You might hire some soldiers, you might build some walls like in this picture here. And after you hire the soldiers and you build the walls, you go out and try to sell national defense. You knock on people's doors. You say, hey, I've got a great service for you. It's national defense. All you have to do is pay us some money every month, and we'll ensure that your home is not overrun by invaders. people are going to quickly figure out that whether they pay or not, they're going to get the benefits. That public good, that national defense, is non-excludable. Just because one house doesn't pay, you're not going to be able to allow them to be attacked by the invaders. Now, another characteristic that's interesting about something like national defense is it's non-rivalrous. If you've built the walls and you have the soldiers on the walls preventing people from invading, then if people in your country start to have more children and the population increases, you don't need more national defense. You don't need more walls or more soldiers on the walls. You're either preventing invasion or you're not. So national defense is a good example of something that must be provided by government. Otherwise, it's hard to charge people. People usually aren't willing to pay for something that they could get for free because you can't exclude them, right? Now, so the two key things to know about public goods are, number one, that governments usually have to get involved in providing public goods. Now, it's important to realize that just because the government provides something does not mean it is a public good. A public good has to have these two characteristics, non-rivalry and non-excludability. If it's a public good, then normally it's a good idea for government to supply it because they can tax people to pay for national defense and other public goods. A private business is not going to be able to do that. The second thing that's important about public goods is that some people, when they don't pay and they get the benefits, we call them free riders, and we call this the free rider problem. If some people do pay and others don't, the free riders are getting the benefit at the expense of the people who do pay for the good. So the free rider problem is why some of these things will not be supplied unless the government actually supplies them. So private goods are rivalrous and excludable. Public goods are non-rivalrous and non-excludable. Now let's look at a list of some things, and I want you to pause the video and I want you to think about whether these things are rivalrous and excludable or non-rivalrous and non-excludable, and then unpause the video and see what my answer is. So pause the video now and think about each of these items. Now, some of these answers might surprise you, but if you really think about these carefully, hopefully you'll agree with me on most of these. Roads, even though they're supplied by governments most of the time, they are rivalrous because more cars will need more lanes to travel on, or more cars will slow down traffic. Roads are also excludable because you can have a toll road and you can keep people off the road unless they pay the toll. Fireworks displays are another good example of a public good. They are non-rivalrous because more people can watch the fireworks, and you don't need more fireworks just because more people are looking. And it's pretty hard to keep people from watching fireworks if they don't pay, so non-excludable. Fish in the ocean are rivalrous because there are only so many of them, so we'd run out if everyone tried to catch all the fish at the same time. But at the same time, fish in the ocean are really non-excludable. There have been some efforts to reduce access to overfishing, but this has been difficult. What about an MP3 of your favorite song? Is it rivalrous? Well, no, because you could copy this MP3 an infinite number of times and you're not ever going to run out of it. And is this MP3 of your song excludable? Can we keep people from getting access if they don't pay? Well, I'll leave that up to your own discussion. The music industry keeps trying and not doing such a great job at that. Healthcare in schools, another one that sometimes people have a hard time thinking about because they are rivalrous and excludable. They are private goods. Even though many countries supply healthcare in schools, private companies can and do provide healthcare and schooling in many places. Lighthouses and fire protection, these are controversial. That's why I've highlighted them in yellow. Many textbooks and many economics teachers will argue that lighthouses and fire protection are good examples of public goods. Why? Well, because lighthouses, it's obvious that they're non-rivalrous. However, it's not so obvious that they are non-excludable, that you could not charge for the service, in other words. It's been found, there's been some interesting research finding that lighthouses have in the past been formed by private companies and they have charged people. And the way they charge people is by collecting money at local ports. And by figuring out where a ship came from, you would charge them a fee based on the route that that ship took. And you would know which lighthouses that it went by. But it's obvious that they're non-rivalrous because a lot of ships can look at a lighthouse without needing more lighthouses or a brighter light. They can all see the lighthouse. So lighthouses are actually kind of a mixed case. It's not that they're a private good, they're not a public good, there's something kind of in between. Fire protection, on the other hand, even though some books, some textbook authors say fire protection is a public good, it's pretty clear that it's not. It's a private good because fire protection is both rivalrous. If there are more people in a town, you need more firemen, more firehouses, more fire trucks. Otherwise, everyone is going to get worse service from fire protection. It's going to take them longer to get there. If there are two fires at once, what are they going to do if you don't have more firemen? What's not so obvious to many people is that fire protection is excludable. If people don't pay, you don't have to go put out the fire. If you Google fire protection medallion or fire protection plaque, you will see some pictures on Google of these metal plaques that fire insurance companies would put on people's houses. And if people paid their premium, the original fire companies in many places, the original fire protection was a private business from fire insurance companies. And when there was a fire, all the fire insurance companies would send out their firemen, and they would only stay and put out your house if you had paid the bill to that fire insurance company. So it is excludable, even though that does seem harsh. It's what I would say is a private good instead of a public good. You can, and it has been done in the past, been supplied by private companies. So out of these examples, roads clearly are a private good. Healthcare and schools, clearly a private good. Fireworks displays are clearly a public good because they're non-rivalrous and non-excludable. And lighthouses and fire protection, they're a bit more controversial. I think fire protection has clearly been shown in the past to be a private good, and lighthouses are kind of somewhere in between because it has been shown in the past that you could exclude people, not necessarily from seeing the lighthouse, but from using a port nearby if they don't help pay to support the lighthouse. You can build in the charge into the fee for using the port.
So what's the point about public goods? Why do we care? Well, there are two things. Number one, we need to have a theory for what things government needs to do and what things government ought to stay out of. If we believe that markets work well for most things, we need to identify the things that markets are not going to work well for, and public goods are one of those things. So if we have, as a society, a demand curve, marginal benefit for something like fireworks, and a supply curve, or marginal cost for fireworks, if we leave it up to the market to provide fireworks shows, it's not going to happen because there's no way to exclude people who don't pay. Everyone will want to be a free rider. This good is not going to be purchased. It's just not going to be supplied unless some community group or government steps in and provides it. And remember the thing that's most important to economists, and that's this total surplus. So remember we have this consumer surplus here. Here we're assuming that this equilibrium price looks like it would be about 9. So there would be our consumer surplus in red, and then down here would be our producer surplus, which is also part of total surplus down here below the market price and above the supply curve, that these two triangles, the total surplus, is what we'll be missing out of if somebody doesn't supply this good to the market. We would lose out on all those gains from trade because people aren't going to buy something if they think they can get it for free, and people aren't going to be able to sell something if they can't exclude people if they don't pay. So that is the big deal when it comes to analyzing private versus public goods. Somebody, probably a government, needs to provide the public good, otherwise it's not going to be supplied, and we're going to lose out on all of that consumer and producer surplus. We won't have any total surplus. It will all turn into deadweight loss. Now let's also look at a numerical example of how a government would want to analyze how many fireworks they would want to supply, and how you have to analyze the demand for private goods differently from public goods.
A private good is something that is rival and excludable. Rival means that if more people want to use the good or service, you need to produce more of it. Excludable means if people don't pay, you can keep them from getting access to the good or service, to keep them from enjoying the benefits of whatever the good or service is. Classic example of a good that is a private good that's rival and excludable is a hamburger. Well, today we're talking about lamb burgers, since we're talking about some Vikings, Lagertha, Bjorn, and Floki. Now, public goods are the opposite, have the opposite characteristics of private goods. They're non-rival, meaning that as more people want to enjoy the benefits of the good or service, you don't need any more. And non-excludable means that it is difficult or impossible to keep people from getting access to this good or service if people don't pay. Our example of a public good is fireworks. Another common example would be public defense. So let's suppose we have a society with three people, Lagertha, Bjorn, and Floki. And let's suppose first that we're talking about hamburgers or lamb burgers. For each of these three people in society, they have a demand curve. In other words, a willingness to pay, marginal willingness to pay curve. So Lagertha, this is her marginal willingness to pay table here in the first column, the pink. Bjorn is in the green, and Floki is in the yellow. So for example, Lagertha tells us that if the price was $10, she would buy zero. If the price was $9, she would buy zero. If the price was $8, she'd buy zero. If the price was $7, she'd buy zero. But if the price got down to $6, she would buy one. So that means that her maximum willingness to pay for the first lamb burger is $6. Bjorn is willing to pay $10 for his first lamb burger. Floki would be willing to pay only $9 for his first lamb burger. Now I've graphed these three demand curves down here. So green for Bjorn, and yellow for Floki, and pink for Lagertha. So you can see Lagertha's demand curve is the lowest, we might say, and yellow for Floki and green for Bjorn. So these are typical price quantity axis, price, quantity, three demands. Now, we might want to look at the total demand. So here we have the total demand for lamb burgers. At each price, we might see what is the total quantity that is going to be demanded of this private good. All we want to do is look at each price, right? Or visually, we could look at the price on the demand graph here. Or we can look at the table. At a price of $10, Lagertha wants to buy none. Bjorn wants to buy one. Floki wants to buy zero. So at a price of 10, the total quantity demanded is going to be 1, because only Bjorn will want to buy, and he will buy 1. What if the price were $9? Well, at a price of 9, Lagertha doesn't want any, Bjorn wants 2, and Floki wants 1. So that would give us a total demand of 3. 2 for Bjorn, 1 for Floki. I've got it graphing the total demand in purple down here as we go. What if the price was only $8? Well, the total demand for all three of these people in society, Lagertha 0, Bjorn 3, Floki 2, total would be 5. Okay? So we see the total demand down here in purple. What if the price was 7? None for Lagatha, 4 for Bjorn, 3 for Floki, 7. At a price of 6, 1 plus 5 plus 4. So you get the idea here. If this is a private good, since it's rival, people, if they don't pay, you can keep them out. And we need more. If there are more people, each person is going to have to buy their own lamb burgers, basically, in this market. We just basically sum these numbers for each quantity. And since this is Excel, we could just program this equals the sum of those three numbers at that price. Okay, and then we can drag that down, and that will continue to add those up. And we can get an idea of what that total demand looks like for the three people in society. Now, what if this was not a private good? It's not a hamburger or a lamb burger. What if it was something like fireworks, where if people don't pay, we cannot exclude them, non-excludable. And if more people want to enjoy the fireworks, we don't need more, right? The more people that watch the fireworks does not diminish the enjoyableness or the satisfaction gained from people looking up in the sky and watching these fireworks. So the tactic for answering this question is very different when we're talking about a public good. What we imagine here is people want to pool their money together and cooperate, or maybe this is a government organization or a community organization. What we want to know is how many fireworks should we buy depending on the price of the fireworks. So what we want to get is, when we talk about the price here, is the total willingness to pay, right? So let me edit that. Total WTP, total willingness to pay for these fireworks. Okay, now we can see that a little bit better. Here's the idea. What if all three of these people said, what if we bought one firework for us to shoot off and we all get to watch it? What is the most we would be willing to pay for that one firework collectively? Because when you talk about public goods, these are things that generally have to be bought collectively by the government or a community organization who either through cooperation, which is a little hard sometimes, or the government taxing people. We want to know how many fireworks should we get based on how much these fireworks actually cost. So the total willingness to pay for the first firework, well, let's start with Lagatha here. Lagatha would be willing to spend at most $6 in order to see one firework. So Lagatha says, I'll kick in $6 for one. Bjorn, what's the most you'd be willing to pay to watch one firework go off? And Bjorn says, $10. I'd be willing to kick in 10 at most. And Floki says, well, to watch one firework, the most I'd be willing to pay would be $9. Okay, well, 6 plus 10 plus 9 is $25. So the most these three together would be willing to buy, one that they can share, and they don't have to have three different hamburgers, right? They can watch one firework and each get enjoyment. That's one of the key things about a public good. So if they go and they look and they see that the price of a firework is $30, they don't want to buy any. They shouldn't buy any because their total enjoyment of the three isn't worth it. But if they see that fireworks cost $20, then certainly they should pool their money and buy one and then figure out how to split the cost. Okay? That would be efficient. Now, what about the second firework? Well, Lagatha says, well, if we were, one is great. Two, if I wanted to watch a second firework, the most would be willing to pay would be 5. And Bjorn says 9. And Floki says 8. So 9 plus 8 is 17. 17 plus 5 is 22. So the most they'd be willing to pay collectively is $22, pounds, euros, to watch the second firework. So they should be willing to buy the second firework as long as the cost is less than or equal to $22, since this is their total willingness to pay to watch a second firework go off, and so on. So this is a little more difficult to do than just adding up the quantity at each price that you would look at for a private good. For a public good, we want to look at the most they're willing to pay for each unit, right? So the third would be 4 plus 8 plus 7. So that would be $19. And for the fourth unit, we would add 3 sorry, $3 from Lagatha that she would be willing to pay, plus 7 from Bjorn is 10, plus 6 from Floki. So 3 plus 7 plus 6, $16. So you take a minute and see if you can fill out the rest of the table, and I'll come back and we'll share, and we'll see if we come up with the same answers for the remainder of these. So here's the rest of the table, except I left the last one blank here. And it's important to note that after the 6th unit here, Lagertha drops out, and she's not willing to pay anything for a 7th, so or an 8th or a 9th. So she just says, I'm done. I'm not willing to contribute anything for a 7th or the 8th. It's just she doesn't like fireworks that much, or doesn't have enough money to contribute anymore. And then Floki, after the 9th, he's not willing to contribute any more money, and it's just Bjorn is willing to pay $1 for the 10th, right? So that's this line here. And then the 11th, we actually don't really have any data for the 11th, the way this table is set up here. Bjorn, since we just go from $1 to 0 willingness to pay here, we don't have any information about what he'd be willing to pay for an 11th. Now, maybe if we asked him specifically, hey, Bjorn, we know if it was free, you'd be willing to watch 12 fireworks. But what about that 11th? What's the most you're willing to pay? We might have to ask him a special question, since this table doesn't have it in there. So we could suppose that we asked Bjorn, since we know that Floki's not willing to pay anything for an 11th. Bjorn, would you be willing to pay 25 cents or something for the 11th? And maybe he would say so, right? But we're not actually sure from looking at this table. We'd have to ask him to get that data. So this shows you how we need to think about the demand for private goods differently from how we look at the demand for public goods. I hope this helps your understanding with how to address these two things differently, and as always, I wish you the best of luck with your studies.